Good morning and welcome to our community affairs program that we call 30 Minutes. Today our special guest is Mr. Chris Stockdale. He's with Adult Protective Services for the state of Tennessee, and we're going to talk about elder abuse. Chris, it's a pleasure to have you on the program.
Charles, thank you so much for having me in today.
And for those of you who are familiar with Thunderbolt Broadcasting, recognize that Chris was a member of this team a few years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been, close to a decade now, I guess.
Has it been that long?
Absolutely. And I actually was the news director up in Martin and everything, so we worked together quite a bit, Charles.
Yeah, we did.
And I've actually been with the state now for about 6 years with Adult Protective Services. I'm part of a specialized team that we're called the Rapid Response Team. Not sure why it's called Rapid, but we get where we can. Part of my team is one of the things we do is we help out all over the state. Since I'm out of West Tennessee, I usually help out if there's vacancies in any of the things like that. Our team, we're called investigative support coordinators, so we can kind of help oversee anybody, any of the other workers if they need some assistance, things like that. Then we help with like specialized cases in case it might be what's called high profile, maybe like a previous state rep or something like that. And then also one of the things that we look at, besides what we're going to talk about with the vulnerable adults, we also look at issues with unlicensed group homes within the state.
Well, I have to ask you, being that you come from radio and got into this, what led you down this path?
Well, years ago, when I lived in Nashville after college and everything, I actually worked in law enforcement. So at a small department in the Middle Tennessee area. So I was somewhat familiar with this, and then before I moved to Nashville, because I'm from this area and I went to UT Martin, I worked for like a little social work agency. So I've always kind of had a social work background and everything, and this has a little bit of a combination of both of them. And when I moved back here several years ago, I worked for another counseling center as well after I left the radio station, and they actually worked kind of side by side with APS, Adult Protective Services, and I really liked how they were set up and everything, and that really kind of got me gearing towards them once I saw an opening.
So you live here in Obion County.
I do. Mm-hmm.
Where is the offices or the main office of your organization? Where are they based?
Well, we're part of the Department of Human Services with the state. So what they call the DHS office, which also a lot of times they call the food stamp office, because that's where you're going to go for, any of your SNAP benefits, things like that. There usually is going to be at least a desk for the APS worker there, so there's one here in Union City. Technically, my desk is at Lake County because it's the closest one to my house. But like I said, I work all over the state, but anywhere that has a DHS office. So Union City, there's one in Tiptonville. Once you go into Weakley County, in Dresden is where the DHS office is. So anywhere there's a DHS office, they're going to be able to get a hold of APS if needed.
Have you enjoyed it so far?
Oh, absolutely. It's not only opened my eyes to kind of how other people live and everything in the state, but I've gotten to work with so many other agencies, because that's one of the things we do is partner with so many different agencies, and I've met so many different people around the state. It's just been a great experience so far.
And not too long ago, before the program, you and I were trying to remember the exact date of it, but they had a big elder abuse conference here in Union City at Discovery Park of America. I mean, a huge crowd with conferences, speakers. TBI was there, right. Other law enforcement agencies. You were part of that also.
Yeah, absolutely. Like our director and some of our upper supervisory staff, they gave some talks during that as well. And yeah, that's something that's really been big. And Robbie Hattler with the district attorney's office now, he's really helped in the area, and I want to give a shout out because he's really helped bring vulnerable adult issues to the forefront in this area, in a rural area like that, because sometimes that isn't serviced as much as in maybe an area such as Nashville or Memphis, where they might have more resources like that. So he's really helped with that, and he's actually been one of the ones that brought that elder abuse day. Yeah, absolutely. So shout out Robbie if he happens to be listening.
Absolutely. And because it was well attended and had breakout sessions, and all the people that are tied in with this subject from all across the state and this title, because I interviewed Robbie that day and just asked him if elder abuse was that big of a problem, and he said yes.
Oh, absolutely. Because it's almost we have a training video, because I don't remember the exact thing, but it's like they call it like the invisible crime, because you don't always see it. Because one of the things, and we'll talk about it coming up, is when we're investigating something, it involves a caregiver. And that might be, that's not always just the person at a nursing home that's taking care of them. That could be a family member and stuff like that. And I mean, if it's happening behind doors at somebody's house, that's not always going to get seen.
Yeah, who's going to see that?
Absolutely.
And he also enlightened me that there's so many forms of that type of abuse, right?
Right, absolutely.
It's not just physical abuse, it's
no,
other types.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, of course, you always hear about that. I think that's one that always gets a lot of more attention or publicity, is the physical abuse. But of course, there's also emotional abuse, where it's people like, yelling at whoever what we call the vulnerable adult, because it's not always just elderly. It can be people that are vulnerable in some way that can't, I guess, take care of themselves in whatever the situation is. And that could be from the emotional abuse. It could be the yelling, but it could also be isolating them from other people, not letting them see family members, keeping them indoors, not even and then, you're going to another side of it, like neglect, not taking them to doctor's visits. And of course, if they're bedbound, not taking care of their needs for being bedbound, making sure if they've got any bed sores or wounds like that, they're not taking care of that. That would fall under that for neglect. And then also there's the financial part of it, financial exploitation, which can be an issue as well, which, because a lot of our vulnerable adults and elderly, they get some kind of monthly check, whether it be from SSI or Social Security, pension, something like that. That can be not going to their care and just going in somebody's pocket. So that's something we look at as well.
He even mentioned how some people have their medication stolen.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing as well, because a lot of folks might be on multiple different kinds of medications, and some of them are going to be, narcotic types, opioids or something like that. And those are going to be, those can be abused easily by somebody else that's around the adult.
So explain to us, Chris, exactly what is Adult Protective Services, and what is your specific job and others that you work with?
Right. Yeah. I'm part of what's called the investigative team. So I'm field staff. We're part of the Division of Child Care and Community Services with what we were talking about, the Tennessee Department of Human Services, DHS. So we're part of there. That's why, the APS desk or office is going to be out of the main DHS offices. And we're actually mandated by state law to intervene in, circumstances of abuse, neglect, or exploitation of those vulnerable adults.
And for you to go into action or go to work, someone has to report this. Is
correct.
That correct?
Absolutely. And to start off, there's different ways to report it. And it's easy to find, like going over it on here, it's, of course, there's a phone number, 1-888-APS-TENN. And then also there's a website. I'm not going to go, do the full spiel with the website and everything, but if you Google it, like Tennessee Adult Protective Services, it's going to pull it up. And there's a way you can easily do it on that. Our intake staff, which is, just a different part of us, somebody's there 24 hours a day. So they're going to take your information and get the report in. There is criteria in place. We'll talk about that a little bit, but they will take all your information, absolutely. And to see if it meets our criteria for a report. And if it doesn't, we'll get it to somebody who might be able to assist if it is an issue.
If you get a call, do you act immediately?
Yeah,
Or
well,
respond immediately?
it depends because there is a response time with us. Usually our cases fall within 3 different categories. A priority A, which is our most severe, that would be within 24 hours. That would be probably one that's going to be something with active physical abuse. Might be something from law enforcement where they find a situation at a house where the vulnerable adult or elderly person is being physically abused at that time, or at a facility, something like that. Then the second one's priority B. It's 1 to 5 business days, so within a week, because most of our workers do the Monday through Friday, things like that. So priority B would be 1 to 5 business days, and then a priority C, which is our lowest category, it's 1 to 7 business days. But I tell you, most of the investigators that I know, especially myself, I'm going to put that there, I try to get out there pretty quick, because a situation can change very quickly depending on what is going on. So I like to get the information pretty quick to see how I can assist.
When you get a call or receive something like that, do you involve law enforcement also?
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime that it involves either what's called an alleged perpetrator with it, and that's going to have an alleged perpetrator if it's neglect, abuse, of the exploitation. Usually we will send almost a copy of the report we have. It's called a 1215. You might hear law enforcement talk about that. We forward that to, and most law enforcement has somebody that is kind of the point of contact for that, and we'll send that to them either by fax, email, however, and they'll take a look at it as well. And they might reach out to us, or we'll reach out to them depending on the situation, because I'll be honest, there's been cases where it's got a lot going on from the report, the description and everything, and I go out with law enforcement sometimes. We go out, as tandem, together to see what's going on.
And I guess a call or a report also probably usually leads to a pretty in-depth investigation too, right?
Oh, absolutely. We're going to look at, if something's going on, especially like, let's say financial, with it, if it talks about somebody's, their needs aren't being met, is something that they say, bills aren't getting paid, meds aren't getting picked up because there's no money, utilities have been cut off, stuff like that. We're going to look at bank records and things like that. We can subpoena the records if needed. Usually we can get law enforcement involved if needed like that. Even on the neglect side and stuff, we're going to, we're going to want to look at medical records and things like that, see how, see if there's a baseline of how the person's health is supposed to be, and if they're in decline right now, what's making them decline? Are they not getting the treatment they're needing, or is it just something that they're in a decline of health right now? So yeah, we look at many different angles when we're looking at a case.
So some of these cases, I presume, lead to criminal charges. Is that right?
They can. That's why we partner with law enforcement, because our agency we don't conduct the criminal investigation side of it. We look at it, we're looking at the, to be an advocate for that person, for the vulnerable adult. But that's why we partner with law enforcement, because if there is a situation where, it looks like something's happening to that person, we've gathered enough evidence, and usually law enforcement's there with us. They know what's going on. They have the same information we do. And yeah, it can lead to an arrest sometimes.
And as you said, this is just not centered on home care with someone, but maybe at a nursing facility, assisted living facility. It's broad, isn't it? Oh,
absolutely. Because that's the thing. There's plenty of workers, and for nursing home, assisted living, also group homes, for people that might, a lot of times group homes might be more of a setting for people with like mental health issues, something like that. And unfortunately, sometimes there's some agencies that, they don't always have the best track record for how their workers are, and they would be considered a paid caregiver then, and we would look into that as well. And another thing with that, because I'll bring that up as well, since we're talking about places like nursing homes, assisted living, group homes, with those being paid caregivers, if they're found like what we call substantiated for a report. If we find out that, yes, this client, this victim was abused or neglected or exploited in whatever way, it might be criminal charges as well. But then also what we'll do, we'll work with our legal staff, and there is a registry, a vulnerable adult registry, where they will be put on the registry. And then that's what different agencies and those places are supposed to, they have to look at that before they hire somebody. So if they're on that registry, they can't work with vulnerable adults or children. They can't work with children if they're on the adult registry as well. So.
Again, today we are speaking with Chris Stockdale. He's from Obion County. He's with the Adult Protective Services for the state of Tennessee, and it's a pleasure to have Chris on the program today. And I'm guessing in your field that you're probably constantly having to update your training. Is that right? Things change all the time?
Oh, absolutely. Like, actually, for one of the things that we can talk about as well, we haven't talked about, another case, it's actually a majority of our cases, is what's considered self-neglect. And what that is, there's not an alleged perpetrator, somebody's not being abused or anything, but it might be somebody who lives alone, who's essentially not able to take care of themselves. They're not meeting their own needs. But one of the things with that is, in the past year, because of how some things were written in the state legislature, we actually lost the ability to look at self-neglect cases. So that really took a hit across the state on how that was looked at for a time. Luckily now, of course, our agency scrambled with our legal staff and with the state legislature to get that fixed, honestly, because like I said, that's a majority of our cases is the ones that are self-neglect, that might be, that person who's living alone that needs assistance.
You mean one that the family member's not helping or friends are not helping?
Correct. Yeah, they maybe they
on their own.
Yeah, on their own. They may not have family in the area. It might be somebody's elderly parents that they have kids that care for them, but they might live in a different state or a couple hours away, so they can't always come and help with them, and they're starting to struggle by themselves.
How do you find out about them, Chris?
Once again, it might be it's a report thing. I'll be honest. Sometimes we've had people that might self-report about that. They might call about themselves, but then that might also be something that maybe like emergency services, like an ambulance, maybe a neighbor has finally seen, because that's the thing as well that we talk about with reporting and everything. Anybody who feels like something like that needs to report, if there's what they call a reasonable cause to suspect something like that, you need to report it. Or you should report it. And, if you see a neighbor struggling, if it looks like, they're by themselves and it looks like they're not doing well, give us a call. Like all they're going to say is either is that it meets criteria or not. And if it does, one of us will come out, try to help out, maybe get some services in there. We're able to do it where, a lot of times we can partner with local agencies and to get some free services in for at least a few hours a week to help them with like around the house or errands or, maybe help out with like some kind of medical travel to go to appointments, things like that.
I'm getting the feel as you're talking that the most important thing in your work and your position is somebody making that report or making that call. Is that right?
Absolutely. And I don't have the numbers here, but from talking to the other agencies that we work with sometimes, I think it is still might be because we're a rural area and, people, and I understand that people want to be independent sometimes about that and everything. But yeah, I think, self-neglect issues, and even like when it becomes like an abuse or neglect situation, it's underreported in more rural areas like here in Northwest Tennessee.
Well, can you explain to us actually what is a caretaker or a caregiver, the definition of that?
Yeah, absolutely. For that, that's somebody as it's described by our, what's written down for our stuff, like our, things that are in place. It's a person that is assumed, they say is assumed the duty to provide for care by the adult by contract are agree or service exchange. So, if it's a paid caregiver that comes in the home, they're getting paid by maybe a home health agency, or it's maybe a private caregiver, which it can be done as well. That also involves like the people, especially around here, it's one of the things that you always hear about is this, the sitters, where somebody might come and sit with they get paid a little bit or however much it is to sit with an older person or somebody who's having some physical issues. That's also be a paid caregiver. And, for a family member, that can also be classified as it. But, they do have to live in the same house or building, for the family member to be there or regularly visit. We can't count a caregiver as a son or daughter or somebody, a family member, maybe the only family member they have, if they're living here in Northwest Tennessee and they live in, like, let's say Hawaii or something, that can't be a caregiver because they can't reasonably get there in any amount of time for that. And then they also have to know about the physical or cognitive issues that person has. They have to be aware of what's going on, of what makes them vulnerable. And, also know that that person can't take care of themselves.
So they don't have to be a professional to be in that position.
Correct. No, absolutely not for that. Because once again, with a family member, a lot of times you're not going to have that professional aspect with it. In a perfect world, might be able to have those professionals in place, but sometimes it does fall on family. And that can be a stressful situation sometimes. And that's what we always like to tell people as well. Once we get into a home and we're talking to people, we don't want to put blame on somebody. If it's an issue where it's concerned somebody's not getting enough care, I don't want that person, that family member that's trying to help them, to think we're there to make them look like the bad guy. Because those are stressful situations, taking care of an elderly parent or something like that. We're there to help and figure out how they can remain, if they want to stay at their home, how we can keep them safe in their home.
You mentioned earlier in the program about all of the forms of abuse and neglect, financial exploitation, and other things that can happen to elderly people and vulnerable people. But what is the number one form that you actually see? I'd
say across the state, if we're looking at one that is going to be the abuse or neglect, it would be the neglect, which, that's essentially when the basic needs of that vulnerable adult is not being met by the caregiver. And, neglect can happen in the home, like we've been talking about, of course, in the private residence where, they're not maybe getting, the doctor's visits that they need, or, it might be where they're trying to help out that person, but they're just kind of there, not getting them out how they need to be. But then that can also happen. That can happen at a facility with paid caregivers as well. Neglect can happen at a nursing home or a group home or something like that as well. But yeah, if we're looking at something like that, just neglect is going to be the one that we see more of than physical abuse or financial exploitation.
Well, during my years here in the newsroom, I have had reports and information of homes that have been closed due to issues like that.
Right, absolutely. And I'll tell you, what we talked about before with my team, where one of the things that we specialize in is my team with the unlicensed group home. It stems from a few years ago, which I helped assist with this, was out of the Shelby County area, where a person was essentially bringing people in off the street to be they weren't paying the people to work at this group home. Not an unlicensed group home is what we look at specifically with that. And they were just essentially just swapping room and board for them working there. And what it became is, because these people were off the street, no any kind of training, not even watching a video to try to get anything. They wound up killing a elderly person at one of them, and that really kind of got state lawmakers and everything involved to look at these unlicensed group homes. And I'm not going to say all of them are bad, because there are some people that have that caring heart that want to help people out of their home and stuff like that. But we're really now looking at those ones that are trying to get that easy money. That I think is kind of what a lot of times with the unlicensed group homes, they think they can just keep people there and then collect whatever they're calling their room and board and rent for the for the month by month with these people, with the vulnerable adults. But now, not just us, but, the Department of Health and everything, they're really stepping that up, that, you're going to need some kind of license or at least some kind of review to have these people in your home, which honestly, I mean, somebody, you need somebody kind of looking out for those as well.
But you mentioned earlier also that sometimes the elderly person or vulnerable person has actually made the report themselves.
Right, absolutely. Because the difference, we get compared sometimes to DCS, the Department of Children's Services and everything, and I mean, we're kind of in the same spectrum as that, of course, on the adult side, but you got to think about it too with adults. If they have the ability to make their own decisions, which we can talk about that as well, but if they're, if they still have what's called capacity and they're making their own decisions, they have the right to self-determine, and they can make a report if they're needing help, of course, but on the flip side of that, they have the right to decline any services. So especially if we get a self-neglect one where it's just somebody at home, and they're still, they still have all their faculties and they're just maybe having some physical issues, they can tell us to hit the road in a good way, or, and even on a thing that might have abuse or neglect, they can tell us, no, they don't want our help. Just, and that same with law enforcement then, if they tell us and they tell us law enforcement, or they tell our partners in law enforcement that nothing's going on, our hands are tied with that.
Even if you see that there is something going on?
Correct. Unless there's enough that, maybe law enforcement can step up for it. But, a lot of times it falls into that about like where, the person be like, no, it's okay. Or, whatever the situation might be, like, I'm fine. And especially that the self-determination can fall into what we were talking about with the self-neglect, because we get of course, I think a lot of people know about it and they know the word, we get calls about hoarding situations, where somebody is really kind of, their house is covered up with whatever it might be, trash, or, I've actually seen it where their house is full of VCRs, like it was hoarded he was just an electronic collector and everything. But a lot of times, unless that's breaking some kind of like city code or ordinance or something like that, there's not a lot that we can do about that. It might be an unfortunate situation. I hate that for them if they're living like that. But if they tell us no, I can't help. I can't get somebody in to help clean their house and stuff like that.
And you said the chances are, if that is done, that they'll just go right back.
Absolutely, and that's the thing as well, which they might even bring it up on those hoarder shows and stuff like that. What they call recidivism. On a hoarding situation, if, like let's say somebody goes in, something gets hired to completely clean out a house like that. And then, they go back there and stay, unless something is put in place, like some kind of counseling to help them work through what's going on, there's over 90% chance that they will, start hoarding again, clutter that house up again.
Well, it's been a pleasure to have Chris on today's program. Some very interesting information. And as we close out the program here, we're about to run out of time, I know that you want to get out to those listening today. If you know of a situation like this, report it, right? Oh, yeah, absolutely. And like I said, it might be something that it may not meet all of our criteria or something like that. And that's okay, too. Just, make that call, and either our intake workers can kind of walk you through that, or, if they're able to complete the report and it goes to a field staff investigator, that will also get looked at. And they'll, the reporter, part of our job as well is to call back whoever the reporter is, and it's always confidential with the report as well. We don't give that info out to anybody. So if that's a worry about anything, you can also do it anonymous as well. You don't even have to give that info. But yeah, we always make sure that we follow up with the reporter to let them know if they want to know what's going on with it. We let them kind of follow along, be like, hey, this is what we're going to do. We're able to get some services in for this person, something like that. It's good to talk to you, Chris. Absolutely, Charles. Good seeing you today. Glad you were here. Chris Stockdale with Adult Protective Services for the state of Tennessee and a former news director here for Thunderbolt Broadcasting. Again, thank you, Chris. Thanks, Charles. And that concludes this week's 30 Minutes program. We hope you enjoyed today's show. And, of course, we invite you to tune in again next week at this same time as we bring you topics and information of importance to our community. From all of us here at Thunderbolt Broadcasting, until we meet again next week, I'm Charles Choate.
You've been listening to 30 Minutes, a community affairs program on Thunderbolt Radio. You can listen to this broadcast and others anytime by visiting thunderboltradio.com and following the Thunderbolt Radio and Digital YouTube page. Thanks for listening.